what is it? The spiritual breakfast, huh? When you hear these tapes played again, you're going to be startled, because you cannot know at this minute what is on them. You're going to be very, very much surprised. I know out of the experience of the classes that I have taught for nearly 10 years that this is an unusual one. I have had classes like this when I was giving practitioner classes with students who had been through 2 and 3 and 5 and 8, 10 classes before. But this is unusual in that the depth of what is being given to us in this, I'm sure, is not in any of our other classwork except practitioner classwork. And so you're going to be surprised when you hear it. And so you may wonder why this can be so, because I'm not saying this in any wise to flatter. I would like you to see that it is the direct result of the intensity of your study of books and the hearing of the tape recordings that has made it possible. Not anything else. If you hadn't been prepared through that, this could not have come through. In other words, a class draws out that which will meet its need. No teacher could sit up here and decide what to give you. That would be an utter impossibility in a spiritual teaching. It is the consciousness, the class consciousness, that draws unto itself that which it needs. You remember I said the very first evening that unless you were convinced that the infinite way were an activity of God, unless you were convinced that I am only here because of an activity of God, therefore you are here as an activity of God, then the message that is coming through must likewise be an activity of God giving us that which we require at any given moment. Now, you will find that this is true, that we can only bring forth into demonstration that which we have attained in consciousness. In other words, no musician can give forth a greater degree of music than their acquired musical consciousness, their attained musical consciousness. An ordinary pianist can't ever give a Paderewski exhibition. And in the same way, no amateur artist or painter could give forth the work of a master. We can only express the state of consciousness to which we have attained. And so it is that we know that no life experience can ever be greater than the attained consciousness of the individual. That applies in every walk of life. We have in the States, I guess, 1 million attorneys, but we only have a few number one, first-ranking attorneys. Why? There are only those few who have put into their work that which they are now drawing out. It is true in every walk of life that you bring forth that which you have attained in consciousness. So you'll find in this, what you have attained is the direct result of what you have put into the work. If you have put in study, meditation, pondering, thinking, you will attain a higher consciousness naturally than those who lightly read and rarely meditate and hardly ever study. Now, there has been a good preparation for this class. Evidently, you have gained much from your reading and from the tapes. And I'm making much of that at this moment because on this point will hinge whatever degree of spiritual attainment you achieve Yes, let's put it this way. By the grace of God, I learned one of the most profound truths that has ever been revealed in the history of the world. I don't mean that I'm the first one who had it, but I'm grateful to say that I'm one of those who had it. And that is this. This is a tumbler. And if I didn't have one, and I would say, I must have a tumbler. I must have a tumbler. And then the thought comes, well, yes, you can have a tumbler. Oh, but you have to have glass. Yes, you can have a tumbler, but you must have glass out of which to form it. Good. Now I'm no longer concerned with having a tumbler. I'm concerned now with getting a hold of some glass. Once I have gotten some glass, I can make a tumbler. So that actually tumbler wasn't my need, glass was my need. Then having the glass, I can have the tumbler. Or I need a table. I say, yes, how am I going to get a table? Well, let's demonstrate one. Out of what? Oh, I know, for a table we require wood. All right, then let's forget the table. Let us go out and demonstrate some wood. Then when we have the wood, we can make our table or chair or cabinet. The secret of life is this. We think that we need health or supply or safety or security or companionship or home. And in a sense we do, just as we need a tumbler or a table. But this I can tell you that there is no way to demonstrate those things unless you have the substance of them. And the substance of health is God. The substance of supply is God. The substance of home is God. The substance of companionship is God. The substance of life eternal is God. The substance of peace, of joy, of eternality is God. And so you might as well right now give up all thought of demonstrating health, harmony, wholeness, completeness, perfection, wealth, success, joy, until you have first demonstrated the substance of which these are formed. And that is God. And once you have demonstrated God, you won't have to demonstrate the others because God is the others. Do you remember? God is the health of my countenance. Well, there's no use of seeking the health of my countenance without seeking God. But in finding God, you have found the health of your countenance. Now, in the same way, God, we are told, is my abiding place. Well, now, what's the use of seeking an abiding place? Because you can't find it until you have found God. But when you have found God, you have found your abiding place. God is my rock and my fortress. Well, then why go out and try to get a bomb-proof shelter? If you get God, you have gotten your fortress. And I can assure you it's a fortress that not even an atomic bomb can reach through. So it is that in this work of the infinite way, we lose the desire to demonstrate form. Now, that doesn't mean that we sit on cloud 9 and say, I don't need a tumbler, or I don't need a table, or I don't need health, or I don't need wealth. We don't do that. We know we need them. But we have attained the wisdom that says you can't have them unless you have God. And if you have God, you will have them in infinite abundance. Infinite abundance. All that is necessary, and 12 baskets full left over. And so you see that from the moment that we touch the message of the infinite way, our entire goal is the attainment of God, the attainment of the realization of God, the attainment of the experience of God. On the first page of Living the Infinite Way, it says that the infinite way is not a message, it is an experience. It is an experience of God. Once you have the experience of God, you will find that everything else is added unto you. And really not so much added unto you as included in you. Once you have attained a realization of God, you never will have to demonstrate anything in life. The demonstration of the thing is the added thing, the included thing, that which is in and of God. Yes, we might use this example too. A person may say, I want a home and I want furnishings and an automobile and a boat. And then someone comes along and says, well, why waste time with that? Why not go out and earn $10,000 and then you can have those things because those things are included in $10,000. That's a very good idea. So it is with this. Do not believe for a moment that it is possible spiritually to attain health unless you have attained a realization of God. You can attain physical health. Oh, yes, you can attain that with aspirin. You can attain that with other medicines or surgery. But even after you have acquired your health, you will find yourself lonesome, inadequate, unhappy, unsatisfied. And then you'll say, well, perhaps I need wealth. And you can. There are loads of human ways, even legal human ways of attaining wealth. But loads of people have attained it too. Then found they had no digestion and couldn't eat the food they could afford to buy. In attaining wealth, you do not necessarily attain peace of mind or peace of soul or peace of harmony of any kind. But in attaining a realization of God, you attain health and you attain wealth or an abundance in accord with our status. But with it, we attain a harmony, a contentment, a sense of satisfaction in living. And there, of course, lies one of the reasons for the greatest discontent that is on earth today. How many people in the world actually have a good reason for living? How many people on earth really have any good reason for staying around another 10 or 20 or 30 years? To what purpose are they here? One religious leader said to me one time that he had heard that the week before I was called to a very elderly lady who was dying and had brought healing to her. And he wanted to know why I had done it. He said, tell me, what is she going to do with that life that you saved for her? Knit some more booties for her grandchildren? Probably from that standpoint, you might say, that's right. What is the difference whether she's on earth eating 3 meals a day and sleeping a few hours at night, or going on to whatever the next experience is? And I have no answer to that. But the reason that I am always willing to help, and to me it is of no concern whether they're 9 years of age or 90 or 109, is because if they receive the help, it is just one more evidence that a realization of God restores harmony. And it will restore harmony if we're 150 years of age. That doesn't mean necessarily that it will change your life, because if you want to go on knitting booties for grandchildren, go ahead. But it isn't a very good reason for living. And you will find out in the world, as you look around, you must think to yourself, why is it so important that these people out here are living? What are they doing for themselves or for the world? Eating, sleeping, half-starving, illiterate, uneducated? What joy is there in life for them? And you'll find, more especially, you travel as much of the globe as I do, you'll come to the conclusion that there isn't too much reason for 3/4 of the world to be living. They're not doing anything with their lives, not accomplishing a thing, not adding a thing to their own well-being or to the world's. And that is where their discontent lies. That is where their unhappiness lies, because each one of us, and I don't mean only us in this room, I mean everyone out there, actually has a destiny, a spiritual destiny which they are not fulfilling, and many of us are not fulfilling. Each one of us actually represents God revealing itself on earth. And to fulfill that, we should every day be accomplishing something not only for our own improvement, but for the advancement of the race, for the world itself. When we're not doing that, there's no wonder that we're unhappy. We're not fulfilling ourselves. It is just as much as if a master musician were to find himself in a position where he could do nothing but play a few shows for the movies. He would soon die. He couldn't stand it, or he'd go out of his mind. Nobody could have the gift of musicianship and ever be satisfied just to sit and drum out a little boogie-woogie. It just cannot be done. And so it is when we feel within ourselves a call to something higher and then have to be satisfied with doing nothing or next to nothing, that brings to us our discontent. Now then, that very discontent has caused evil in the world, because it has made some people ambitious for the development and fulfillment of their ego instead of their God capacities. And it is that type of person who has become the dictators of the world in all ages, in all generations. That was the type of the ancient Caesars and Borgias. That was the type of the Genghis Khans. That was the type of many of our modern dictators and near dictators and would-be dictators. The fact that inwardly they felt this call to be something more than an army corporal or something more than an nonentity, but not knowing how to fill it in accord with God's plan, they filled it according to their own ego and built themselves high places. We have had the same in the States in the periods up to the early 1900s, there was what we call the era of the robber barons. They are the people who acquired $100 to $200 million of wealth by plundering railroads and steamship companies and bankrupting one company after another to increase their personal wealth. And actually, what prompted these people was this inner urge for expression, for accomplishment, for achievement, something that every one of us at some time or other has felt. Only instead of letting it evolve through a God plan, they fed their own egos, probably through ignorance. We have an illustration of the opposite of that in a man who in his very earliest years recognized that he was a genius, a great inventor and a great engineer. And he formed a manufacturing company in the States and became very successful in a very short time, and then out of a clear sky went bankrupt. That he couldn't understand, because he knew that he was a better manufacturer of his line than anybody in the business. He knew he was clever, he knew he was a genius, but he was a bankrupt. And while he was going through the process of bankruptcy, he spent hours and hours at a time, daily introspection, trying to find out why, what had brought this upon him. And then one day the realization came, I know, I left God out of my business. That was the whole thing. Oh, that'll never happen again. God becomes a partner of my new business, and I'm crediting him with 10%. And he did. He began tithing 10%, but not merely mailing out a check. He saw to it that that money went into places where it would accomplish some good, according to his light of good. And his success began. I read an article just about a year or two ago that this man is today giving 80% of his income to God. But he still had $4 million each year left over. At the very moment we admit God as a partner into our experience, acknowledge God as the source, the fount of whatever good there is in our lives, intelligence, wisdom, direction, morals, whatever it may be that we claim of good, acknowledge God as its source, then our energies not only cannot be misdirected, but we are directed to some type of fulfilling activity that gives us a good reason for living, a good reason for being on earth. You may hear the full story in another tape someday, but at one time in my experience, I was very close to death and knew that it was only a matter of a few hours. And in that experience, the realization came to me that it would be futile for me to die, that I had never done anything on earth that would even repay my mother for her birth pangs, and how foolish it would be to leave this earth without accomplishing something worthwhile, at least to say thank you to her for that. And you know that that was the turning point, and I awakened in the morning healed. Just from that one realization that my life had been nothing but a human experience, that had really accomplished nothing any more than ordinary humans do, earn a living, give a little of it away, but really nothing of a worthwhile nature. And that was the turning point in my career, because it gave me back my health and then led to all of the activity that has resulted in this. And now I have no hesitation. If the call comes at any moment, at least I can say, well, something or other has happened, and some people have been benefited because I passed this way. Out of all this experience, I know this. that if there is an unhappy person in this room, it is because they are not fulfilling themselves, because they have not found that which gives them the ultimate of their satisfaction. Now, there are some people who are being fulfilled in being mothers, and that's all right. It's a marvelous career. But all people cannot be fulfilled that way, not even all women. Some men are fulfilled in being successful men, successful merchants, or whatever their line may be. But all men cannot be satisfied with that. Each one must find that which fulfills them in order to have a full and complete life. And then you'll quickly find that if you find it through a realization of God, you will have found contentment and peace and joy, and with it comes health. Now, answering some of these questions. How would you translate the Orthodox communion in the infinite way? Communion is an experience, but it is not an external experience. A communion is something that takes place within yourself. In order to commune, you must commune with something or somebody. And for you to commune, it must be you that's doing the communing. Not you being communed, you doing the communing. And so a communion is any period of your experience when you are having an inner experience with whether you call it God or Christ or your inner self or the oversoul or the divinity of yourself. Whenever you as a human being are attempting to commune with your inner being and finally attain that state of consciousness wherein you know there is a flow between you and it, that is communion. And in that communion, the Spirit of God, which is the grace of God, the power of God, the presence of God, flows in and through your whole being, your mind and your soul and your body. And in that communion, you actually attain God's grace, God's peace, God's supply, God's allness. Now, a communion that doesn't attain that flow inside is not yet a communion, even if it is an attempt to commune. It is only an effort in the right direction. The communion is complete when you have the feeling of an answer within you, when you have the feeling of having made contact, when you feel a warmth or a glow or a sense of release, or when a smile comes to your face and you can't account for any external reason for it. There's no reason for it. It's just there because you are at one. Then you are in communion. And the result of that communion is the descent of the Holy Ghost, that being enfolded in the Spirit of God. That, of course, is the object of all of our study and meditation. That is why sometimes we use the word communion in place of prayer or treatment. In the early days of our work, we might be permitted to use the word treatment, but as you go on, you will never refer to it again. You will think of yourself as being in prayer. But the day will come when prayer will take on such a different meaning that you'll drop it too. And you won't treat anymore and you won't pray anymore. You'll then understand that the secret of life is communion. And when you are in communion with God, the flow of God is going through you, and that will result in peace, joy, power taking place out here to yourself and to all those who are in touch with you. That is the meaning of the statement, I, if I be lifted up, shall draw all men unto me. If I am in communion if I am in contact so that the flow of God permeates me, then you who are receptive must inevitably receive some measure of lifting up through that. The degree, of course, varies with the individual. There again comes, what preparation have you put into the experience? If you come just as a human being out of the human world with no preparation, you are apt not to feel the experience at all. If you have come with some little preparation, you're apt to feel a little of that gentle presence. If you have come with deep preparation, it may be a deep, deep experience. In one of our classes in Seattle, and ever since then we have referred to the experience as that Thursday. Everybody knows what that Thursday means. There are about 300 of us in this truth temple, and I was standing on the platform talking, and all of a sudden I stopped for no apparent reason, and it was as if darkness came down in the room. The lights were still there, but they seemed to be dimmed, and there was a hush. But so far as I was concerned, it was very apparent. The presence of the Christ was right there before us. And then all of a sudden a woman screamed. And then gradually the lights were full again. And we learned later they hadn't ever been other than full. And I went on with the lesson. But the woman who screamed told the leader at the door that when she came in, she had a tumor as big as a 9-month baby, and that in that second it evaporated, and she showed her loose clothing. There wasn't a sign or trace of it. And before that evening, we had, oh, I can't tell you the amount of people who reported healings in that very instance. But the strange thing is this: there were at least half of the people in that audience that never knew anything happened. They weren't aware, and still aren't aware. They don't know what the rest of them are talking about. Do you see what I mean? That it is your consciousness that determines the degree of the experience. You might have Jesus Christ talking to you and find that one half of the multitudes that he's talking to go right out the next day to help crucify him, while the other half were lifted right into heaven, healed and fed and glorified, all depending on our individual state of consciousness. Well, this communion that we learn is the thing that enriches our spiritual development and changes us from the educated, reasoning mind to that mind which was also in Christ Jesus, which never has to think, never has to analyze, never has to reason, always gets the answer presented to it. In the there is a similar state of being in what is called cosmic consciousness. Now, cosmic consciousness is not Christ consciousness. Cosmic consciousness is the same form of activity as Christ consciousness, but on the human level. In other words, when Thomas A. Edison, who was very close to God but was considered an atheist because he didn't believe in going to church, when Thomas A. Edison was at work in his laboratories, his method of work was something like this. He'd get very still, hold his ear out, and then he'd say to his engineers, "Do this." The answer came through in that way. There was a man in Massachusetts who is responsible for having put all of the utilities, electric utilities, in all of New England. And he used to play with his directors at the banks. They would have these mechanical, electrical adding machines and figuring machines, and they'd put intricate problems on them, and before the man could hit the key to draw them off, he would give the answer. He didn't have to figure. As soon as you said 2 times 2, he saw 4. But with him, It wasn't just 4. It was any amount of figures and any kind of complicated problem. That was the cosmic. He had no need of thinking or reasoning or figuring. It was a knowing. Well, the Christ consciousness, the spiritual consciousness, operates the same way on a higher level, because in it, as it comes through, it transforms the physical appearance into the spiritual reality. We, of course, with our three-dimensional eyes, merely see an improved body or an improved pocketbook, but that isn't what is actually there. And only this communion reveals that which is there. What is your opinion of spiritualism? That is sitting in developing circles. Well, I don't know that I'd be entitled really to an opinion, because spiritualism is another of the human activities. Whether or not it has any place in human affairs, I don't know. It has nothing to do with spiritual living. It has nothing to do with God. It merely has to do with whether or not you and I can talk to each other here and continue to talk to each other after one of us has left this physical plane. Now, it has nothing to do with God, whether you and I can talk to each other face to face, or whether you listen to me on a tape when I'm 10,000 or 50,000 miles away, or whether you can still talk to me after I've left the flesh. It's still a conversation or a discussion or a teaching with human beings. Nothing spiritual about it. But if it ever develops that it has some function on earth, well and good. There are people who are in contact in that way with people from the other side and receive guidance in their business affairs or guidance in their personal affairs, and I suppose the value of that would be just about the same as if you had someone on this plane in whom you had confidence to give you guidance in your affairs. But beyond that, it has no, at least it has no demonstrated value at this time in our spiritual living. And it may detract. Sooner or later, we who are on the spiritual path must learn that I and the Father are one, and that the Father within me is the great I am. And when we want anything, need anything, require anything, we must learn to turn to that withinness and not depend on some person or something or some condition, so that should we ever be in the position of, let us say, Mr. Rickenbacker when he was out in the rubber lifeboat in the Pacific, lost, and no hope of food and no hope of drink, could sit there with folded arms and for 3 weeks be fed. And not only himself, but the 6 men who were with him. Now, that sounds impossible, doesn't it? But that actually happened. For 3 weeks, that man sat there with folded arms while birds came down and sat on his head. He lifted them off, killed it, and gave the men to eat. And then fish jumped up out of the sea into the boat. They had no fishing lines, they had no guns, they had no human means of being fed, but for 3 weeks they were fed every day. And not only that, but water. Fresh rainwater fell out of the cloudless sky, so that they were even provided with water for 3 weeks, and then ultimately rescued. Well, now, if we were depending on the advice of our banker or our broker, or if we were depending on our parents or depending on somebody that passed on, of what avail would that be when we're sitting out there in mid-Pacific? Now, that may be an extreme thing, and you say, well, we probably never will be quite in that position. No, no, no. But in some degree, every one of us is in that position every day. Every day, some of us are in the position of having a need, of requiring a fulfillment of one nature or another. And we turn usually to human sources and resources for that fulfillment, until one day we find that even though we may be getting fulfilled on the physical plane, there still is an inner lack. And then it is we learn what we have learned in this infinite way work, that there is no satisfaction unless you have the conviction God is. Once you have the conviction God is, and that means that God is available, God is at hand, God is omnipresent, God is fulfillment, God is divine grace, until you come to that, you have not fulfilled yourself in life, you haven't completed your mission on earth, and you may find yourself returning over and over and over again through human experiences until that day does come when you can realize God is, and that governs my life. What is the difference, if any, between a psychic clairaudient warning and the one you had prior to taking your plane journey? I really don't know. I don't know the nature of a psychic clairaudient warning. I can only say this: if the psychic clairaudient warning came as through spiritualism from someone who had passed on, then that was merely a human warning. Whereas in this case there was nothing human about it. It was one of the many, many spiritual experiences that come direct from this still small voice and governs my entire life. But otherwise I've had no experience with what a psychic clairaudient warning may be. And as a matter of fact, it may well be that some things that are called that may be this same still small voice, or what we call God. We are told, thou shalt not kill. How then can a conscientious objector be wrong? Well, I don't know that anyone can say that a conscientious objector is wrong. I don't believe we have any right to judge as to rightness or wrongness. But in my own experience, and of course all we're getting through the infinite way is my own experience, that which has been revealed to me, many, many things take place in consciousness to govern one's conduct in life. And the problem of conscientious objector never came to me as an experience until the Second World War, when it came to me through a group of Christian scientists who decided to be conscientious objectors and wanted the sanction of the church and didn't receive it. And at that time, because some of them came to me for help, it was necessary for me to take this up in meditation and come to a right answer. Now, in my personal experience, when World War I was declared, that is, when America entered World War I, there was no question in my mind of what was right or wrong. I laid down my business, turned it over to other men, and I enlisted. That seemed to me the right thing to do. And you might understand that if you will realize this. My ancestry is Hebrew, and my ancestors were in Spain and Portugal during the Inquisition, and they fled or were driven out of there into the only two countries that would permit Jews to settle. That was Holland and England. And so my entire ancestry on both my father and mother's side were of that stock of Spain and Portugal, who were driven to Holland. My father's to Holland and my mother's went to England, and for generations lived in those two countries, and then finally through a chain of circumstances came to America, where my mother and father were born and where I was born and all our family. Now with that for an ancestry, I think you can readily understand that to me the most sacred thing on earth is liberty, freedom, equality. To me, nothing else counts. I would gladly lay down the message of the infinite way for any work that I could do that would perpetuate the idea, or I would dedicate the infinite way to the idea of liberty, freedom, equality, justice for all. And so, when that war came, it was inevitable that I had to be one of the first, and to do it without thinking. Don't think that I thought it out. Oh, no, no. It was just those generations of background that forced me to that. Now, a miracle happened after I was in service, because I began to pray for myself, for my safety and for my security, and my protection all around. And one day it dawned on me that I was either being a fool or I had a God who was a fool, one or the other, because how on earth could a good God, a just God, a loving God, give me protection, safety, and security while I was walking around with a gun on my shoulder, revolver at my hip, and 4 men in back of me with machine guns? Was God going to allow me to walk up and down Europe shooting Germans right and left while giving me divine protection? No, I couldn't believe that that was true. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't understand why God should so favor me. On the other hand, maybe the Germans were praying the same prayers. So why shouldn't they have the protection just to shoot me up? I saw that that was not intelligence. That really wasn't a God. But I didn't know what was. And so I said, I'm not going to pray. I'm not going to do any praying now. I'm even going to put my Bible aside and wait for divine guidance. Wait for God to show me how to pray. And it was a few days later when I accidentally knocked my Bible off my stand. As I went to pick it up, in letters that looked this big, I read, "Neither pray I for these alone." And I said, thank you, Father. That is prayer. I have got to pray the realization that all men abide in God, that all men are under God's wing, that the everlasting arm upholds all mankind, all men, and forget this friend and enemy prayer business, save my friends and destroy my enemies. No, 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 pray for all men. And that led me to one of the revelations that now you will find in the message of the infinite way when you come to the subject of prayer. It is much more important to pray for your enemies than it is to pray for the members of your own family. There is a greater spiritual comeback to you in releasing your enemies from condemnation or the desire for their punishment or extermination. Greater spiritual power in that prayer than in any prayer you can voice for yourself or your friends or your allies. Now then, what happened? After that realization, I was transferred, and then I was transferred again, and then I was transferred again, and I was transferred again, and the transfers kept on and kept on until one day we got on board ship to go to France to fight, and the armistice was signed that day, and the bells rang. So that at no time was I brought into danger, and at no time was any enemy brought into danger from me. Now then, this all came back to me when I was helping these men with the problem of conscientious objector. And what I saw was this. Had I been a conscientious objector, somebody else would have been filling my uniform. And if they hadn't had that same vision that I had, I might have been responsible for their death, not only an enemy's, but an ally's, a friend's, a countryman. Isn't it far better that I go out and get killed than let somebody else get killed in my place? Thank you, Father, I think so. I think so any time. I would rather, if called upon, give my life than yours. Much rather. And frankly, I'd rather give mine than an enemy. Why? At least I have advanced to that point where I don't believe in death, and where I know it would merely be a transition from one state of living to another state of living, and I have no fear of that. And so I might save somebody else the fear of that. Or by shirking my duty as a citizen, I may be causing somebody else to suffer what would rightly be where I would be. And so to me, the conscientious objector may be doing all right according to his own light, but he certainly is not preventing killing, because if he doesn't do it, somebody else is going to fill his uniform and do it for him. And the war is going to go on just the same, whether he's in it or out of it. And if he takes his position in some civilian activity, or, as some of our boys did, in the medical corps, they're still out there in the same position as a person who buys a bond. Anybody who buys a war bond is just as much of a killer as the man who pulls the trigger. This is true at law. Any attorney will verify that an accessory to murder is a murderer. And if a person buys arms and ammunition for somebody else to use, they're part of it. Now then, we are not in any position under Christ's law to defy human government. We must render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. And if we accept the joys of citizenship, we must pay the price of citizenship, whether we believe in this particular phase of it or do not believe in this particular phase of it. We have had occasion to witness that in the last 20 years in our country, where consistently 48% of our voting population were not in sympathy with our government. Yet nobody has ever brought any accusation against them for doing anything detrimental to the government, but rather working along constitutional lines to correct whatever we believed to be wrong. That's the way we have had to work it out. And so the conscientious objector must decide within himself what is right or wrong. I am presenting the subject to you from the basis of my own experience. I would prefer to accept my responsibility as a citizen and then depend on my spiritual understanding to see that no harm came to me or another. Why must the problem be met immediately to be effective? And why, if treatment given later, will the treatment be ineffective? Now, that is a slight misapprehension of what I have said. I have said that the problem must be met immediately, or else we make it more difficult to meet at a later date. For instance, supposing you say to me now, I have a headache, and I instantly, the very same second that you are talking, realize, since God is the only being, that ends that. God's being has no headache. I have met that immediately. But supposing I say, oh, I'll give you a treatment before I go to bed tonight. I have accepted your headache and am permitting you to carry it until I get ready to give a treatment. Do you see that? So it is, supposing one person here tells me they're ill, and someone over here says, yes, I feel ill too, and someone else over here, well, I feel ill too. Now I have stored up for myself 3 treatments that I will have to give, all the time permitting them to go right on in their suffering. Whereas if, as each one voices their problem, I am instantaneously, immediately translating it within myself, realizing its nothingness, I have no treatment to give later, and the healing can be instantaneous, can be immediate, and often is so. Now then, if you get to be a busy practitioner, you will find that there is no other way than meeting your problems instantaneously, because there never is a later time to give a treatment. I can illustrate that best by telling you that in my last year of practitioner work before I started the teaching, that I averaged 135 calls every day of the week, 7 days a week, 12 months that year. Now think how 135 calls could have been handled by saving up to give them treatments later. Do you see that? It's an impossibility. Each call had to be met at the instant of the call. It's true that the healing may not always have taken place in that instant, but then the call came back from that person later in the day or the next day, and again the work was immediately done. They may have called for a year, but at each call the work was instantaneously done. It wasn't saved up for tonight, nor were you permitted to have your headache or other pains without the benefit of instantaneous realization. Now, of course, you can accept a call and then say, oh, I'll give the treatment later and work on it later, but you'll find that once the claim has been permitted lodgment in your consciousness, it's much more difficult to get out than if you had never let it in. And all healing work is based on not letting it in. You will find when you come to these practitioner tapes that the instructions and the work given to our practitioners is this: the secret of healing lies in one word: reaction. The way the practitioner reacts to the claim determines how and when the claim will be met. In other words, if the practitioner receives the claim and says, oh, I've got to run inside and do something about this, oh, this is terrible, somebody is dying, they're very apt to die. Whereas if the practitioner instantly realizes the life of God is safe and secure, that then determines what happens with the case. If you do not take the claim into your consciousness, you won't have to get it out. Now, I illustrated with the flowers. You and I know that they're beautiful, clear, distinct, and pure white. And if you should glance over there and see them turn black, the thing to do is not to say, I think I'll do something about that later. That is, turning them back to white again. It would be far better to instantly say, no, in spite of appearances, I know that they're perfect. Then you've given your treatment. Because, you see, healing work has nothing to do with turning those flowers from black to white, but from realizing that they're already white, always were white, and always will be white, because that is the nature of that flower. Now, it is the nature of the Son of God to be spiritual, whole, harmonious, perfect, complete. And so if someone says to you, I'm sick, you have no business to make them well. You're not called on. You're not a doctor. No, no, no. You are a spiritual light. You are called upon merely to say, that may be the appearance, but thank God my spiritual vision shows me man is complete, perfect, harmonious. Why? Because God really constitutes man's being.